antebellum era, post-war of 1812, this is really where we are creating this greater American identity. If you remember coming out of, or even going into the Revolutionary War, there's no real America. There's kind of this British, much more Anglican version of America. And while we don't really want to be British per se, in that we don't want like the crown ruling over the colonies, most of these individuals are still British. Does that make sense? If you look at the Founding Fathers and you look at those individuals who are signing the Declaration of Independence, who are signing the Constitution once it comes about, and who put the Articles of Confederation in place, these are individuals who, many of them actually were born in England. It's not like they're second, third, fourth generation. A lot of them were actually born in England. And so as a direct result of that, that culture, that English culture, is pretty pervasive in American society. That doesn't really change until we see the first Industrial Revolution. Now, when you think the first Industrial Revolution, I would urge you to think of, or not, because that one apparently doesn't work, to use the acronym TRIC, okay? TRIC. And this will help you to dictate that antebellum first Industrial Revolution. The T stands for our textiles, okay? R stands for railroads. Yes, we are beginning to get railroads and other road systems, okay? They are new and they are early on. Most of them are in the New England states. And again, that makes sense because in the New England states, that's where the vast majority of the merchants are, right? And so we need more goods transported through that region because that's where it's being produced. It needs to go to markets in those areas. In the South, we have very limited goods being produced. So the goods that are produced, yeah, do we need shipment? Yes. Do we need as much shipment of that product? No. Does that make sense? And most of the very large plantations that are producing huge amounts of this cotton, most of them are located near some large waterway. Because before railroads, how did you get your products to market? You did on ships. Does that make sense? Sail ships, right? Ones that used wind power. Eventually, yes, we're transforming that into the use of steamships and steam-based locomotives, railroads, okay? All right. So when we get into the I, this is iron, I-R-O-N, iron, okay? So we do have metal, and we are using metal to help build larger structures, to help build the railroads, everything else like that. But it's iron, and iron is flawed in lots of ways. But one of the biggest ways that it is flawed is the fact that it is extremely heavy, and it is hard to work with. Does that make sense? So it limits your ability to grow. In a city, it will limit your ability to grow upward, okay? And you'll have limited ability to grow in height. If you think about New York City, as that population expands, both from people coming in, our first wave immigrants are mostly Irish, German, okay? East or Western European, Englishmen still coming in. As people come in, where are they gonna go? Well, yes, some of them will go west, okay? But remember, west at this point in time is like Ohio River Valley. There's not a whole lot of people that are west of the Mississippi River. Starting to trickle a few, but by no means large numbers, okay? So the vast majority of them are going into urban environments, going into cities, filling in those jobs of these factories that are being created, predominantly surrounding around textiles. Does that make sense? Yes.
So is the West still like the Wild West right now?
Yeah, the West is the uncharted territory.
Really?
Does that make sense? 1803, we have Louisiana purchased, okay,
Yeah.
under Thomas Jefferson, and so with that and then subsequent exploration of this territory, there are some people here, right, and there are people moving into that region. But we don't see large numbers of people moving west until actually after the Civil War. We have this image of our head of the Oregon Trail, and we think, oh, that's how people moved west, was along the Oregon Trail, right? Wrong. There are some people that move west along the Oregon Trail, but the vast majority of Americans actually settle in the west after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, okay? Which is post-Civil War, 1869, 68, 69, okay? So that's when Americans move west, is when it's easier to get there.
So like Josie Wales is out there right now, like running around. Yeah.
Sorry.
Josie Wales?
No.
I did not know that.
What? Clint Eastwood, like all those movies, like Gunsmoke, like that's all happening right now.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of like Western movies because
They're so historically accurate.
Yeah, exactly. They're so not historically accurate. Okay, the last one here for us is coal. Okay, not coal as in coal our student, but coal as in like coal. Okay. All right, so like you get a lump of coal for Christmas. But when we look at coal, this is predominantly how we are fueling this industrialized system. It's how we're fueling the railroads. It's how we're fueling the steamboats along the canal systems. It is how some of our industries are growing through this use of coal power. Does that make sense? And through the coal plant. Keep in mind, these are not the most efficient way of doing things by any means, right? But it is in that first industrial revolution that the United States will see this emergence of who we are as Americans. And if you think about it, I would argue that the biggest reason why is because of Americans being able to produce their own products. As long as we're buying goods from Europe, as long as we're buying goods from England predominantly, not making our own, everything that we have is going to look English because it is English. Does that make sense? And so all the ideas are going to be based off of that. Your fashion, your products, chairs, whatever, is all going to have that English element to it. Once we start making those products ourselves, then we have that ability to create American products. And think about it this way. What creates our culture today?
Popular people.
Popular product.
Popular people, popular products, popular people use popular products, right? Okay. Right? So it's the goods, the products that truly shape who we are. I mean, even if you want to say that America's sports culture shapes who we are, well, again, the NFL, it's still a product that is bought. Does that make sense? Sports are still products that are purchased, so they're still shaping who we are. Within that, then, because of these new industries, instead of just having the merchant who's trading the product, you now are also going to start to see an emergence of people who are manufacturing the product. And if you have workers working in a factory, there's going to have to be somebody who is in charge of those workers, right? Now, those people in charge, they don't own the factory. They don't have that level of wealth, but they, because they're in charge, are going to be able to generate more wealth. And as a result, we're going to see the rise of the American middle class. Okay, for the first time. So a separation between not just the wealthy and the poor, but now we have that middle class. Despite the changes that are occurring, most Americans and most of our society is still very much based off of the cult of domesticity. The idea that a woman's place is within the home and a man's place is in the workforce. Now, there are some exceptions, but it still follows the rule of cult of domesticity. There are women, yes, who work in the mill systems and in the brothels and wherever else. But most of the women working are working in mill systems. Does that make sense? And in the mills, who is working in the mills? Women, but they're not just, it's not just any woman. They're young women who are unmarried. Does that make sense? Once those women were married, they were sent home to go live in the cult of domesticity and raise babies and cook and clean and all that jazzy jazz. That was still their job. And it's not that abnormal to think of women out are in the cult of domesticity working, because still those women are predominantly working in textile mills, which, remember, that comes from the cottage industry, which was originally women's work. So there's still this clear distinction of women's work versus men's work. Does that make sense? Now, the prostitutes are a little bit of an outlier. There's always been prostitution in society, always, okay? You cannot look at any time in any point in history where there wasn't prostitution. But when we look at it in our urban world, it becomes increasingly popular because, one, you have men who are getting a working wage. Okay, so there is money that is available, right? You actually, instead of just trading or producing a product yourself, you are earning a wage, which not only means that you're going to consume more alcohol, but also as you consume more alcohol, you're also probably going to gamble more, and you're also going to consume more sex. Sure, you're consumers, you're buying a product, the product just happens to be sex. It's still a product, and it's still something that's being consumed, so I don't disagree with it, okay? You are buying a service. I don't know if you're renting the product, you're buying a service, okay? But all of these things will help to greater shape American identity. And as that American identity is shaped in the antebellum era, and as these problems begin to arise, there begins to be a greater push for change and how do we make America better.